you. Thank you. Thanks very much for re-inviting me 4 years later. We've definitely been looking forward to this. And it's great to be back in the region. I did my undergraduate degree in political philosophy at the University of York as well, and haven't been back since. It's been a while. So I'm a digital humanitarian, which means I use new technologies like robots and advanced computing like artificial intelligence to accelerate relief effort after major disasters. And I became a digital humanitarian on a very specific date, namely January 12th, 2010. This is the date that a devastating earthquake struck Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and I found out about it right away on CNN. I had the TV on the background. I was at university. And I saw the news, and my life kind of froze because my wife was in Port-au-Prince at the time doing some of her grad school research, and I had no idea if she was okay. I tried to call, like SMS, email, went on Skype, went on social media, could not get anything through, could not get any sign of life back. And so you can imagine all the emotions that kind of ran through me. Really felt just paralyzed and freaking out. After 10, 20 minutes of just watching the news and feeling paralyzed, I just couldn't bear the thought of continuing to wait. It was just unbearable. So I was spearheading Ushahedi's program in crisis mapping at the time. Ken Banks mentioned Ushahidi yesterday, so I figured, okay, I'll just launch a crisis map. And I went back on social media because I had found a number of Haitians tweeting live from Port-au-Prince while I was looking for my wife. And a lot of the tweeting included some geographical clues about the devastation that they were witnessing, about churches or orphanages and schools, which allowed me to actually pinpoint that on a map as well as resulting needs. And I went also on Facebook and found the Haitian diaspora self-organizing, creating Facebook groups and sharing information about what they were learning and taking some of that information and mapping what I could. And I didn't do this alone that evening. I had a number of friends just join me remotely via Skype to help me look through social media and map that information. It wasn't until about 1 a.m. That I finally got an SMS back that my wife was okay. She had just narrowly escaped a collapsing building. So obviously a lot of crying, a huge sigh of relief. But we had started something that night, and we realized that obviously many Haitians weren't nearly as lucky. So we just decided, okay, let's just continue mapping. And we didn't sleep at all that night, or much of that week for that matter. But the next morning, when the sun rose back up in Haiti, we were completely overwhelmed by the explosion in social media, in mainstream media as well. And looking back, in a way, this was our first battle with quote-unquote big data. And we simply could not keep up. And so we decided to reach out to other friends and student body at the university, strangers, anybody online who could help us crowdsource this huge explosion of information from Haiti. And so this was anything but a one-person show. Unlike what the media likes to do, is just take one person and glorify that person as the hero. And that's just the complete opposite to the truth. This was a huge effort with hundreds and hundreds of digital volunteers from all around the world who offered their own time, often hours at night, early in the morning, and for weeks on end to sift through this massive amount of information. And so it's easy sometimes to forget when you look at a crisis map like this that these dots didn't just magically appear. There are hundreds, in fact, thousands of digital volunteers. And this was a map like no other map in that if you looked at it, it didn't stay the same for more than 10 minutes. As more and more people kept filtering information and adding content to the map, it was a live or living organism that kept on evolving over time. The real challenge we had, and frankly, we didn't win that big data battle, is to make sense of this information that gets generated, almost like looking for needles in a haystack, right? When disasters happen, you've just got this explosion of information, and you're looking for those 0.01% number of reports that actually augment situational awareness, that are actually actionable for humanitarian disaster responders on the ground. And it's really challenging. As I mentioned, what we did in the wake of the Haiti earthquake is we crowdsourced that response. frankly, because there was no other way. We didn't have the luxury of spending 2 months in a lab or even two days in a lab to create some more automated algorithms that could potentially help us at the time. So it was entirely manual, which this picture might look like fun for the first 2 minutes, but the digital equivalent is just dozens of spreadsheets, hundreds of pages worth of Skype chats, millions of tweets, hundreds of thousands of news articles that were being manually sifted through. So obviously, very laborious and time-consuming, and certainly not scalable in the way that we need methods to be for making sense of big data. Despite losing that big data battle, we still seem to have supported relief efforts in a meaningful way. This is Craig Fugate, the director of FEMA, the U.S. the head of the U.S. Disaster Response Agency, who referred to our map as the most comprehensive, up-to-date map, which is shocking in some respects, because this was all done purely by volunteers from all around the world, crowdsourced, pro bono, and frankly, nothing like this had ever been done before, so we were literally making it up as we went along. Right? There were no professional humanitarian organizations involved in creating that map, and we found out later still, according to first responders who got in touch with us, that they were using our map, and according to them, in their own words, were then able to help save hundreds of lives thanks to that map, which is, again, quite surreal, given that this was all started with an emotional, personal reaction, but then grew into an incredible groundswell of digital goodwill from all around the world. Now that was 2010, and there's a bit more data around in 2015, and humanitarian organizations are completely unprepared to deal with this. Still in a way today. I mean, they're used to a world marked by information scarcity, barren information landscapes where we didn't have enough information to know who'd been affected how badly for weeks, frankly. But now they're increasingly in a different kind of world where they're overwhelmed by the total information overload that happens. And we're all realizing in the humanitarian space that this overflow of information can be as paralyzing to disaster response as the absence of information. So we're actually no better off in either of these data climate kind of scenarios. And in fact, it's the best way to describe how humanitarians responded at first to big data is if you think here, Puff Marshmallow Man is big data. Again, they'd never seen anything like this before and didn't have the technologies, so they were basically legging it the other way. They refused to even think after the Haiti earthquake that disaster response had changed, and it had to change further. But the good news is it has changed, and we're still using crowdsourcing. There's still a lot of value with crowdsourcing, but what we're doing is we're complementing crowdsourcing with artificial intelligence. We're combining human computing with machine computing, and we think that is a sweet spot to make sense of this big crisis data that gets generated. And I want to now share some real concrete examples of this from literally just a few weeks ago, as I'm sure all of you know about the devastating earthquakes in Nepal. Unlike 2010, this time around, the United Nations was able to make use of one of the platforms that my team and I at QCRI have been developing. It's a free open source platform, experimental prototype, not perfect, still under development. But the idea behind micromappers is to combine crowdsourcing with machine learning to very quickly look for those needles in the haystack, look for those actionable pieces of information that could be potentially life-saving information, and not just text-based information, but across different data types. So the UN used micromappers, launched it, and to look for urgent tweets, for example. So this is our tweet clicker. It's a collection of clickers we have with micromappers. And if you were a digital humanitarian volunteer, this is exactly what you would have seen. It's a screenshot from just a few weeks ago. And it's very simple. You read a tweet and simply classify the tweet based on the appropriate categories. Now again, sure, this could be fun for the first few minutes, but if you're talking about millions of tweets, as we've seen over the years during major disasters, this is not going to scale on its own, which is why we have another free and open source experimental platform called AIDR, AIDR, which stands for Artificial Intelligence for Disaster Response. And what AIDR does is it's really just an AI engine that learns in real time from this volunteer crowdsourced tagging of tweet. It starts to recognize which tweet belongs in which bucket, and then can automatically classify up to about 2 million tweets per hour, if need be, which is still way ahead of what we need right now in the so-called big data challenge in the humanitarian space. But we're going to have to optimize that further in a few months, no doubt. Now, much to Twitter's chagrin, most people are not on Twitter. But a lot of people have access to SMS. So we've been working with UNICEF for the past year to extend the AIDR platform to an AIDR SMS platform, allowing them to automatically classify about 2 million text messages per hour. So they've already been piloting this in Zambia with some really wonderful successes that we've learned about over the past few weeks, where the classifiers have gotten to a 90% accuracy, and that allows them to automatically classify about 10,000 of text messages that they get a week. In Zambia, in Uganda, they get about 1 million text messages a month, and we're already talking now about applying this in Nepal during the recovery reconstruction phase. They've got an SMS project there as well. Pictures speak 1,000 words, and so the United Nations also used our photo clicker as part of micromappers in response to the earthquake in Nepal. The idea here is simply to ask volunteers to look for disaster damage in these pictures. These pictures we automatically collected from Twitter and mainstream media. It's not about one or the other. It's about trying to get as much of the data possible, pushing it to the crowd, and simply asking volunteers to tag the appropriate level of damage that they see in each picture. It really is as simple as that. If you can click like on a Facebook picture, you too can be a digital humanitarian. As long as you can get online, you can actually help support relief efforts on the ground. Now we showed, just like with the tweets, we showed every picture to at least 5 different volunteers. And that's for triangulation purposes, so that if most volunteers think that this picture shows severe damage, we would then take this picture and place it on our crisis map. Now this may be fun again for the first couple hours, maybe, but it's not going to scale, and it may not be the best use of human time to spend hours and hours and hours tagging this information. So we're also looking to a number of different computer vision platforms that have been set up over the past 6 months at Stanford and other places to start teaching the algorithms to recognize what a picture with disaster damage looks like. And we're doing the same thing with CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, looking at some of the work they're doing with automated analysis of YouTube videos that get posted online. So the idea really, again, the future of disaster response really is a combination of crowdsourcing with artificial intelligence. And all this data ended up on this live crisis map that was made available to the United Nations and to other humanitarian responders as well as the public. Through this work, we were able to automatically tag 500,000 tweets and then boil that down further and add pictures and so on. So it does have to end up on a map, not because we just like maps, because once you can map it, it's actionable. Telling the United Nations that there is a destroyed bridge in Kathmandu is a complete waste of time. Where in Kathmandu? So it's really important to have that. And I want to again reemphasize the digital goodwill that really helped to drive that. We had about 3,000 volunteers in 90 different countries around the world who came together to really help others in need, really help humanitarian efforts in Nepal. So again, it's just as much a human story as it is a story about technology. Now, we can't really believe everything we read on social media or mainstream media for that matter. So we have to be able to verify this information. And there again, what we're doing is we're looking at, we've developed some prototypes and platforms to do time-critical crowdsourcing for the verification of user-generated content during disasters in order to counter rumors or detect rumors as early as possible. And we're also experimenting with a combination of crowdsourcing and machine learning to automatically classify the credibility of tweets during major disasters as well. Again, all experimental kind of work. But I want to talk about a different bird for the rest of my presentation, and namely flying robots, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones. I was seconded to the United Nations right after Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines in 2013. It was Category 5 typhoon, absolutely devastating results. And I was really struck by the fact that I saw a dozen different UAV projects, and this was completely unprecedented in humanitarian response. We'd never seen that much. We saw one UAV used in the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, but that was basically it. And so I figured, okay, now's the time. I had already been experimenting with UAVs myself during the couple of years before that, but I didn't realize we were there yet in the humanitarian space in terms of adopting and using these technologies. So I launched this humanitarian UAV network in order to catalyze closer collaboration between the UAV sort of aerial robotics communities and the humanitarian space, because these two communities do not talk to each other at all. It's not a natural conversation. It's two very different worlds, two very different ways of thinking, and vocabularies as well. But it is happening. Humanitarian organizations are starting to experiment with small micro UAVs. It's not a hypothetical at all. This is a picture from just a couple days ago from colleagues of mine at the World Food Program in Congo, Brazzaville, at a refugee camp just north of the country, where they're collaborating with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, to start looking at how to use UAVs as well for planning in terms of camp management and so on. So it really, really is happening. What we've done is, since humanitarian organizations can't be everywhere at the same time, is launch a crowdsourced crisis map of aerial videos and pictures of disaster zones from all around the world, taken by professional UAV pilots, by members of the crowd, and so on. So if you go on there now, you should see about 40, 50 aerial videos and pictures of the Nepal earthquake from the past few weeks. Now, this is increasingly becoming the official interface for the humanitarian body and UAV communities to basically request imagery, share imagery, collaborate, and so on. So you've got a number of different humanitarian organizations who are serving on the advisory board of the Humanitarian UAV Network, along with manufacturers, along with researchers, scholars, and so on. And just recently, the World Bank activated the Humanitarian UAV Network after another Category 5 disaster, Cyclone Pam, in Vanuatu. This was end of April. And I was invited by the World Bank to spearhead the World Bank's UAV response in the aftermath of this major disaster. So I recruited a number of teams from the Humanitarian UAV Network, professional UAV teams, brought a number of different UAV assets to Vanuatu. If you're not familiar with UAVs or haven't seen them flying around, we primarily used multi-rotors, not as much fixed wings, just because there were some complex airspaces and other issues. But again, UAVs are flying robots. You program them to operate, and you wait for them to do what they need to do. It gets quite boring after a while. This was just some manual calibration we were doing the day before we started the mission in Vanuatu. One of the advantages we took in response to the cyclone was not to limit ourselves to nadir imagery, meaning sort of a bird's eye view, what we're familiar with when we look at satellite images, right? We're looking straight down. Unfortunately, that can hide a lot of the damage, and the purpose of our deployment here was to do disaster damage assessment. So we prioritized a collection of oblique imagery, pictures taken at an angle, like you see right here, one that I took with my UAV just for demonstration purposes. And then, because our colleagues at the World Bank, our GIS teams, were completely overwhelmed with other data sets, we decided, okay, well, they're never going to have a chance to look at this anytime soon. We've got to do this quickly, this disaster damage assessment, in order to help accelerate the relief effort. So let's crowdsource it. Let's slice up the imagery into micro images, and you might have guessed it, let's modify micromappers in order to enable digital volunteers from all around the world to trace individual houses that are damaged, fully destroyed, and so on. And that's exactly what we did. In just a matter of days, digital volunteers from all around the world again analyzed over 2,000 aerial images. And remember, we showed every image to 5 different volunteers, so there was a lot of traction going on and a lot of activity. If you go to micromappers.org, you'll see the map for yourself. The blue traces correspond to what the crowd believes are intact, largely intact houses, orange, partially damaged, red, fully destroyed. And you can see, you would not be able to get this kind of image with a satellite. Best resolution you can get with commercial satellites is about 31 centimeters. We were down to 3 or 4 centimeters here, and having the oblique images. Here are some of the other results. What we're doing now is we're working with other computer vision experts to start training a classifier to automatically identify damaged buildings, damaged houses, damaged infrastructure from oblique imagery, which, as my computer vision experts colleagues remind me, is not trivial, Patrick. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm a wannabe, perhaps, computer scientist. But I think from what I understand and from what they're telling me, there have been some exciting breakthroughs in computer vision over the past 16 to 18 months. So this is a worthwhile applied research project. But ultimately, even with a beak imagery, you only get one angle. I don't know what that house looks like from the other side. So what we're really going to have to do in the humanitarian space is move directly to 3D. This is a 3D point cloud of a village in Vanuatu that we surveyed. And you can construct these 3D point clouds only from 2D aerial imagery. And so that software to reconstruct 3D point clouds has been around for years, so this is not particularly new. So humanitarians have not, however, really thought about leveraging this because they're not aware that you can do something like this. In any event, this is what we're going to have to do in the future, is really move to 3D so that we have a surround view to really be able to get up close and assess disaster damage using the frameworks that the World Bank and the UN has for disaster damage assessments. And what we're going to want to do is crowdsource this analysis. So what we want to do, this is actually a model, a 3D model from Nepal, from downtown Kathmandu, one of the squares that were affected after the earthquakes. You can take the 3D point clouds, convert them to 3D models, like you see right here, push them to micromappers, and then crowdsource the annotation of disaster damage in these 3D models, and maybe even allowing volunteers to move around and having that kind of virtual reality feel, and just with fingers, just trace areas that are disaster damage. And then what we do next, once we have that data, which is useful right away for disaster response, we can also use it as training data to automatically, or to teach an algorithm to recognize what 3D damage looks like in these models. And that's sort of one step, right? And you can find out more on this. I just blogged about what we're trying to do with the World Bank and the UN at irevolutions.org. You'll see the video. You can play around with the models yourself. And this is a very low-resolution model, by the way, because we didn't go in with the purpose of creating a high-resolution model. But ultimately, it's not just about one data source, right? It's going to be about data integration, data fusion in the humanitarian space in order to augment the situational awareness of disaster responders on the ground, using crowdsourcing and machine learning, artificial intelligence to make sense of satellite imagery. We've got a project with Skybox on this and Planet Labs, aerial imagery, text messages, social media, mainstream media, data mining of news, as well as the Internet of Things to basically populate that map, and then to ultimately automatically annotate these 3D models during future disaster response exercises. So we've come a long way since the Haiti earthquake, since the 2D purely crowdsourcing approach. But again, with everything that I've just described, there's still human beings involved. You would not be able to get that training data for machine learning purposes, without people caring in the first place. So we have plenty of examples in the news, right, of the bad ways, the evil ways that technologies are being used and how we're using technologies to spy on ourselves and bully and this and all the other kind of cruel examples you see every day. What I'm talking about is a different narrative where these technologies are actually extending our humanity. No longer do you have to sit behind the television, look at bad news about another disaster like the Haiti earthquake, like the Nepal earthquake, and just keep that emotional reaction to yourself. You can get online, you can get on micromappers, you can join the Digital Humanitarian Network and actually do something about this and get involved and support relief efforts directly. So that's my story and the story of Digital Humanitarians that, well, the United Nations and others refer to as digital Jedis, and I wholeheartedly agree. I've just met some of the most incredible people in my life over the past 5 years thanks to this digital volunteering. So hopefully you're asking yourself, how do I join this incredible movement? One way, I've shared all the mistakes that we've made over the past 5 years in this book, everything that we've learned the hard way, and basically to get others to join these efforts. And I know that there's from all the talks we've seen so far, some incredible digital Jedis in this room. So I would love to connect with you if you're interested in exploring how your skill set, how your technologies could potentially support future relief efforts. That's the main reason I'm here. I really want to connect, and I want to learn from all of you and see how we can improve the relief efforts. It's going to take a village to support relief efforts, both on the ground and digitally. So I welcome an open collaboration. Thank you very much.
First off, thank you for the fascinating talk. You mentioned when you started all this, it was completely, literally grassroots in the sense the grassroots was you. And is there a major coordinating body now that sort of coordinates and underpins this work? Is it the UN that's kind of come to the fore, or?
That's a great question. So in 2012, I co-founded with the United Nations the Digital Humanitarian Network, which you can Google and find out about. And it's basically taking all these different digital volunteer groups from all around the world who have different skill sets, different kinds of superpowers, whether it's satellite imagery or Translation Without Borders, Translators Without Borders as a member. So dozens and dozens of these digital volunteer groups who are now all connected through the Digital Humanitarian Network. And this network now has become the official interface when humanitarian organizations are facing a huge big data challenge during disasters. They basically activate the Digital Humanitarian Network to ask for help, and this network provides a search capacity that and the technology, the skills, the know-how that these traditional dinosaur-era humanitarian organizations lack, but they recognize that they lack that. And it's phenomenal that the United Nations would say, okay, yes, let's put together something like the Digital Humanitarian Network, which certainly did not exist in 2010. And now we can be proactive in response to these efforts rather than reactive.
Well, at least it's positive that they're willing to accept that they need help.
Huge.
So fantastic. Yeah. Thank you, Patrick, so much. Cheers.